All right, well, you made it. Video 5, the final part of our entire 5-part video series on the home buying journey from A to Z. So first and foremost, congratulations. I'm really proud of you. Way to go all the way through the first 4 videos. Hopefully you did that. And now you are here at the final video, video number 5, where we're going to talk about from contract to close. So recapping from the last video that you hopefully finished before watching this one, where we talked about getting our offer submitted and hopefully accepted. Once that happens, we are now at the final stage, which is our contract to close. And this is when it gets really exciting. There's a lot of moving pieces during this part of the transaction. And the biggest thing more than anything is just being very good with organization as well as communication. And those are 2 things that I always have at the top of my list of importance. And one of the reasons why I have a team member who is a transaction coordinator. So she's actually going to be a big part of this contract to close part of the process. And what I love about having her on the team as a transaction coordinator is she is able to be very, very diligent with just ensuring that all of these different dates and deadlines that are within the contract, that they're always being met. We're always prepared ahead of time. So there are never any of these curveballs or just last minute concerns where we need to submit something to be in compliance and not fall out of contract, and be able to just always know that we're staying, organized and following the dates and deadlines. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's something that very few realtors actually put that same level of confidence or importance into. So a lot of realtors don't use a transaction coordinator. They just rely on themselves to keep track of all these different dates and deadlines. And I understand that's fine if they're trying to save a little bit of money, but for me, I think it's well worth putting a little bit of extra money that I'm paying for to have this transaction coordinator as part of the process, again, from contract to close. What I want to start off in this part of the conversation is talking about once that offer gets accepted and is mutually executed, meaning that both parties have signed, you're going to be signing as the buyer before we even submit the offer. But if everything is good to go and they agree to all of the terms in the contract, then they're going to sign it on their end, the sellers will. And at that point, we are under contract. So the first thing that I always do once we get under contract is reach out to my transaction coordinator and just give her all of the necessary info so she's also aware, because there's always going to be a couple deadlines that are going to be very quickly approaching once we get our offer accepted. And the biggest one is going to be the earnest money. So earnest money is basically just funds that the buyer is putting into an escrow account. And what this is doing is just showing the seller that we are serious and we are, putting money on the table here on the line to vouch for us. And basically telling them that if we don't fulfill our obligations with the contract, then they are going to, in certain situations, be able to take that earnest money if we don't perform as we are expected to with the offer and that signed contract. I will say though, Colorado is a very buyer-friendly state. Every state has different rules and different regulations when it comes to the contracts. And one thing that's really nice about Colorado, again, is there are a lot of separate dates and deadlines, and each of these dates and deadlines, for the most part, are giving you as the buyer the ability to at any point kind of get out of the contract. Let's just say, for example, here, we'll use a couple scenarios. Let's say that we are working together, you're the buyer, I'm your realtor, and you're coming from out of state, and you've only been able to see the house really just through some videos that I've sent you. You haven't been able to come out to see it in person yet, but this house isn't going to last long, so you just still want to put an offer together and get it under contract and then come out and see it in person and just ensure that what you are expecting it to be is reality. So let's say that this happens, we're under contract, and we have our inspection. So inspection is going to be one of the dates and deadlines. I'm going to go through all these dates and deadlines here in a few minutes, but let's just say that during this inspection, you find out that, man, didn't really notice it on the pictures on Zillow, but man, these windows are in really bad shape. There's all of this dry rot, which is like the wood sill on the windows is all deteriorating. And man, these windows are in such bad shape. We're gonna have to replace the entire home's windows, which talking to some contractors, getting some estimates, could be as much as maybe, $45,000 or $50,000. Oh, geez, we didn't expect that. Now, all of a sudden, the deal that we were expecting that we thought was going to be a really good financial decision to buy this home, maybe now it's not. During the inspection, we have what's called an inspection objection and also an inspection resolution. So during the inspection, we might identify the windows needing to be replaced, and we might then be able to put an inspection objection together, which we would submit to the sellers saying that, after the inspection, we identified these 5 things, these windows, they really need to be replaced. And, right now it's maybe more of a buyer's market, meaning maybe we have more leverage as the buyers to push back and try and get a few more dollars in concessions. So we're going to push back and say, we want to have, instead of a $500,000 home, we're going to now, that's what it's under contract at. That's what we put in our offer. We want a $50,000 credit at closing to pay for these windows being replaced at a later date. So that would be an example of us during that inspection objecting to the inspection. The sellers are now given a period of time. Typically, it's about 24 hours, or it could be a little bit longer depending on the timing of things. But they now have the ability to review what we've countered with this objection, and they can say, yeah, you know what? We'll pay that. We'll agree to that. We'll give you a $50,000 credit at closing. Or they might say, that's just, you guys are reaching for the sky here, Every home has windows. It's an older home. You should have expected the windows to not be brand new. So we're willing to give you a $20,000 credit at closing. So for example, we then have the opportunity to then accept, counter back, or we can just walk away. Walking away would be an example where even if you haven't seen the home in person, you're flying out to see it for the first time, we have the ability to kind of push back on some of these inspections, appraisals. There's several different dates where we have the ability to get out of the contract if needed. So I just wanted to make sure you realize that, putting an offer together and getting it submitted doesn't need to be this make or break, very intense part of the process that we're going to be going through together. Yes, we obviously only want to put offers into sellers' hands that we do truly want to buy their home. However, even if we're not 100% confident yet that this is the right house, as long as we're, for the most part, confident, we do have the ability to take some of that pressure off of us by knowing, even after this offer has been submitted and accepted, that it doesn't mean that we're committed to buying the home. We still have several ways to get out if needed. So that's really important to realize, and also hopefully take a little bit of that pressure off of you to understand that you don't necessarily need to be so, passionately positive that this house is going to be the perfect house for you before ever submitting an offer. The one caveat to that is you're not allowed to submit offers on multiple houses at the same time unless you're truly trying to buy multiple properties at the same time. If we're going out and looking at houses and you see 3 homes that are all, really similar, you really like all 3 of them, and maybe you want to see, which one we could lowball the seller and get the best deal on, we're not allowed to submit offers at the same time on all 3 of those. We would have to pick one, again, unless you can prove that you truly are trying to buy all 3 of those homes. So let's just talk for a second about some of these dates and deadlines. I briefly touched about this on the last video, video number 4, where we talked about submitting the offer. But as you can see here on the screen, there are a lot of dates and deadlines. So as you can see here, we've got a ton of different fields for dates and deadlines. Everything from the earnest money being deposited to recording title, checking out any survey-related stuff, any homeowners association documents that need to be submitted to us for review. If the home is going to be financed, we need to make sure we have the loan approval, as well as the appraisal, any surveys that might need to be done, the inspection, and then due diligence, as well as just the actual closing date. Now, it is also important to understand that while we do have all of these dates and deadlines laid out very clear, and they are accepted among both parties when this offer is accepted, that is very important to understand that that is the case. However, there are very commonly scenarios where these dates might need to get adjusted slightly. Just as one example, if you see that, we're having an inspection done and the resolution date is only maybe a day after the actual inspection, maybe it's a really busy time of year and it's hard to get the inspector to come out on the first day that we're able to have him come by, and there's just not enough time left over between a couple things. Anyways, there's a lot of opportunity to modify by doing an amendment to this contract if needed, So there's always a little bit of wiggle room if both parties are willing to accept those changes. However, though, we do want to kind of go from day one, understand that these are the dates and deadlines, and really act accordingly to those dates and deadlines. When it comes to a buyer, and me as a real estate negotiation expert, there are a lot of little tricks, or maybe a better word than trick is just strategies that we can do to make sure that our offer really stands out above others that might be also competing against us before the offer does get submitted. I know I talked a little bit about that on the last video, but it's also important just to understand again that there are a lot of strategies that we can be doing to really make this offer and also this contract not only as desirable as possible to be accepted and get us under contract, but also once we're under contract, limit the amount of time for certain things. So an example of this again would be the inspection. If we have the inspection as a certain date, let's say it's this Friday, or let's just say it's a couple days from now, the inspection objection might be 1 or 2 days after that, and then the inspection resolution might be a couple days after that. It's good for us as a strategy to try and minimize that amount of time between the inspection objection and inspection resolution, mainly just so that the seller has a level of sense of urgency where they're not able to really think about, their options or, consider, what dollar amount might be incorporated into replacing all the windows, rather than just, using the numbers maybe that we're providing them as our estimated expenses. It's also good to understand that when you have a cash offer, which for almost every single seller, it's always going to be more desirable if they have a cash buyer. But anytime that there's a cash buyer, some of these dates and deadlines are actually going to be null, or they're going to be not necessary. And one of those would be appraisal. So, obviously appraisals are very important, and I recommend doing an appraisal for pretty much every house that we're going to be seriously trying to purchase. However, if you are a cash buyer, what's nice is you can not be required to have an appraisal as part of the lender requirements. If you are having your home financed and getting a loan, the lender is going to have this as a requirement where an appraisal is going to be a necessity. Sometimes, these appraisals, they might come back below the dollar amount that we have the home under contract for. What's going to happen is the loan is not going to be approved for the dollar amount. So in that case, that'll be another way for us to negotiate, potentially getting the price down. Or if it's a really tight market and the sellers are really pushing back, they might require you or the buyer to bring additional cash funds to closing to make up that difference. So if the home is under contract at $500,000 and it comes back with an appraisal at $475,000, that $25,000 difference is now going to have to be made up by the parties that are involved, either the buyer, seller, or maybe there's a mixture of the two coming together to make up that $25,000 difference to be able to get to the closing table successfully. That's just another example of this contract to close part of the contract, of the process, where, some things might come out of left field and we might need to be able to kind of adjust accordingly. So I'd also just like to share a few of these other dates and deadlines, because this is, again, really the contract to close. These are the different things that we're going to come across over this period of time. Typically, it could be anywhere between 30 and 45 days from the day we go under contract to the day we close. If it's a cash offer, this is an example where these are more desirable to sellers, usually because it's a shorter period of time. Instead of 45 days, for example, it might only be 15. It might be a 2-week closing if it's a cash offer, and some of these dates and deadlines can be eliminated. So that's obviously always going to be more of a bonus for sellers. If they see a cash offer, they're going to usually go more towards that direction, even if it's a $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever dollar amount, but a lower dollar amount for the home. A $500,000 offer that has a requirement that it's going to be, a very tight loan to value, meaning that the people that are trying to buy might be approved for a $500,000 loan, and this is right at that peak, right at that $500,000. There might be some concerns. Are they going to be able to still qualify when we get within a week of closing? Are they still going to be able to qualify and make this actual transaction happen? Versus a cash offer where some of these things are going to be eliminated, such as the loan availability deadlines. And in this case, the seller has more confidence because they know that some of these outs or some of these options, some of these opportunities for buyers to get out of the contract, they're not going to be there for the buyer to get out of because there's no lender or no loan involved. So just wanted to again share that with you. But I think the biggest ones that I want you guys just as an overview to really be paying attention to, the first one is what we call a seller's disclosure. So a seller's disclosure is a form that is a legal requirement that the current homeowners fill out to the best of their abilities. So anything that they are aware of, it is a requirement that they write this down on the seller's disclosure statement. So let's just pretend that, you're a homeowner and 5 years ago, you had a major leak in your basement, had to rip out the drywall, had to take down some of the studs. You were concerned about mold and mildew, and you had it repaired. You put the wall back together, but maybe you just kind of did it yourself. You didn't have you didn't do it with a licensed contractor. You didn't have to pull any permits from the city of Denver. You just kind of did it with your uncle, who's a really good handyman. You need to put this on the seller's disclosure as a seller, and as the buyer, you are, it's really important that you are reviewing the seller's disclosure in its entirety, and hopefully everything that was a concern was put on there by the seller. These could also, though, be examples where, you might not even be aware of something when you go under contract, and then in the seller's disclosure, all of a sudden you find out that, man, there's a bunch of stuff they're putting in here about some structural issues that were a concern 5 or 10 years ago. If that's enough of a concern to make you decide you want to walk away from the deal, you have the ability to do that, and you have the ability at that type of scenario, take all of your earnest money back with you. So there's no harm, no foul. Didn't cost you anything other than maybe an inspection if you'd gone that far along into the process. So there might be some expenses that you're going to be incurring that might be a wash, where you're going to lose out on that. But a $500 inspection versus a $50,000 structural renovation that has to be done a year later. I mean, obviously, you get the picture here. So after that seller's disclosure, the other big ones, again, are going to be the appraisal and the inspection. So typically this is going to be the lender working with the buyer and having one of the lender's appraisers go out to view the property. They're going to typically be there for a few hours. They're going to do measurements of all the rooms, take a ton of pictures. And then a lot of the work they do is actually behind the scenes on their computer, where they're looking at comps. They're looking at other properties that have sold that have a similar condition as the home that's under contract, as well as, similar features, square footage, bed, bath numbers, type of home, number of floors, the size of the lot, the acreage of the lot, all this kind of stuff. They always like to try and go no further back than 6 months. So any homes that have sold in the last 6 months are typically what the appraisers are going to be looking at. And they're always going to try and do it as close to the actual home as possible. Ideally within a half mile, maybe 1 mile. At the most, they try not to go past 2 miles. One other nice little side note I'll share with you, I have a really good process for doing similar comp CMA reports myself using an appraisal type approach, where I'm getting these comp properties to a similar place as the subject property, the home that we're trying to purchase, so we can then compare apples to apples. So instead of looking at one home that's 1,500 square feet and one that's 2,000 square feet, I'm able to use some calculations that appraisers also use to make the 1,500 square foot home kind of priced to be the same as that 2,000 square foot home. I can talk through that in a lot more detail with you on a later time, but just wanted to point that out, that I can always do detailed CMAs to really help us understand, the offer that we're putting out. Is it a good number? Is it going to be competitive? And is it really going to match what some of these other homes in the area have recently sold for? So after the appraisal, the biggest one that I always tell my clients is really the biggest hurdle to get over. Once we get past the inspection objection, and the inspection resolution, once we get through that entire part of the contract, we significantly go up in our chances to make it to the closing table. I don't have any specific data to share with you that backs up this number, but I've always kind of used the number 90%. Once we get past the inspection and all of the resolution, we've all agreed that whether there were or were not any inspection objections, they've been negotiated, and if any concessions need to be made, they've been agreed to. Once we get past that, we are much, much more likely to close. Really, the only thing that I've had experiences with, which would get us out of contract and have the deal fall through after the inspection, is usually related to the financing. So the buyer, if, for example, you get pre-qualified with your lender and everything looks great, the numbers work with what we've put our offer together for on this home, and everything looks great and satisfactory for the lender. But man, we find out only 2 weeks before closing that maybe you did something you weren't supposed to. Maybe you co-signed on a auto loan for your son or your nephew or somebody that was in a pinch and they really needed your help. So you signed on a loan for them as, you know, a second person on the loan to help them qualify. Well, oh man, now all of a sudden by doing that, you might have actually added that extra debt, that extra liability from that new loan that you've co-signed on. Now maybe you don't qualify anymore. So there's always going to be a very, very, very strong understanding by the buyers that they need to be very cautious about any new debt or any new activities that might affect their credit report. So making sure you're still paying down your credit cards, making sure that you're keeping your credit utilization amount at or below 30% of whatever total amount of credit you have been approved for. Another little side note, I've got this awesome credit repair playbook. So if you're not quite yet to the point of wanting to put, you know, offers out on homes and get to this part of the buying process, but you really just want to kind of get more comfortable and maybe in that best possible position for when that day comes, download a free copy of this credit repair playbook. It has some awesome tips on just really what matters when it comes to how to improve your credit score and get you in the best possible place for when that day does come. So one last thing on this before we move on, talking about that last possible hiccup or concern that could take us out of contract and kill the deal is going to be that loan availability deadline. And that's usually going to be within about a week, usually actually only 3 or 4 days before the closing. And what's going to happen here is once the final numbers have been ran by the lender and they've still acknowledged that you still qualify and you're capable of executing on this home loan that you're doing with them, we're going to have what's called clear to close. Once we hear those 3 awesome words, clear to close, that means we are good to go. The closing is going to happen and we are going to be celebrating at the title office or wherever we're going to be signing the final documents at closing day. So this is always super exciting when we get to this point because we know that now we go from like a 90% chance to like a 98% chance, 99%. So that's always a really good benchmark to get past that clear to close or that loan availability deadline. I will go too in depth on the inspections. I know we already went past that part of the contract to close phase, but also I want you to be aware that when you do have an inspection done, there's a ton of different inspectors out there. I have a few that I recommend. I have one particularly that I love using. I use them on almost every single purchase. And what's great about the inspection is they're really working for you in this case. So even though that this inspection is being done on the seller's house, this inspector works for you. You're the one paying him. And what most of the time, at least, that's again, something that can be negotiated in the offer. But the inspector is really going to go above and beyond every little detail he can possibly find on the house that is either a major concern or maybe just something to keep in mind for the future. John, who's my inspector that I tend to always use if possible, he has color-coded where it's red, yellow, and green. If it's red, that means it's urgent. You really need to look at this and address it soon. Yellow would be, stuff that is maybe on the radar that, maybe this gutter is starting to fall down a little bit. It should be looked at sometime soon, those types of things. And then green are just things that are passing the inspection. So most of the time it's going to be a lot of green, a little bit of yellow, and inevitably there's always maybe a couple things in red, depending on the age and condition of the home. Outside of the actual inspector coming out and seeing the home, I almost always recommend that there's also 2 add-on inspection services that we always have done, especially here in Colorado. The first one is going to be what we call a sewer scope. The second one is what we call a radon test. So for the sewer scope, this is basically a plumbing company that comes out that has this really cool camera that's on a snake. It looks like a little wire that they stick down into the PVC pipe, which turns into a actually ceramic or a different type of material that goes from your home all the way out typically to the middle of the street that you're on, connects with a lot larger sewer system that then takes it to the city's, pipes and everything else from there on. A lot of times these sewer scopes can come back with some what we call bellies, which are just over a long period of time, some of these pipes start to have settling issues where instead of it having a perfect downward grade from the home to the pipe out of the street, there might be areas where some of this, especially with ceramic pipes, have kind of deteriorated a little bit, maybe even caused what we call a belly, which just means that there's standing water in a certain part of this pipe. A lot of offers that I've had accepted, what ends up happening is during this inspection and this sewer scope, we've identified that there are some issues here. And again, this is the great opportunity for us as the buyers to push back during that inspection objection and maybe get a few extra dollars at the closing table through concessions. Another thing on top of the sewer scope is going to be radon. And radon is just something that is varying by state to state on how common it is. But in Colorado and in Denver, we are finding quite a few homes that come back with radon levels higher than what they recommend we have. Radon is actually pretty simple. It's a cheap test to be done. I think it's only like $75 to $80 to have the test done out at the home during the inspection. And if it does end up needing it, depending on what's going on in the house as far as the logistics of getting this added to the home, this radon mitigation system, it typically isn't too bad. Usually about $1,500, maybe $2,000. So obviously that's real money, but it's not something that typically can make or break the deal. If it does come back with high levels, that's another thing that we'll try and negotiate as a concession. And if the sellers aren't willing to accommodate that, buyers a lot of times will still just accept that, okay, well, I might need to look into adding this radon mitigation system down the road. The radon mitigation system is basically a PVC pipe that is connected into the space below your home. If you're on a crawl space type foundation where you have, an open area of air below the home, sometimes that area can become very limited with ventilation. And if radon does exist in the soil below the home, those radon levels can be high. And then what might need to happen is a fan with this PVC pipe needs to basically pull a lot of that air out of that crawl space and then somehow get outdoors and vent out of the home to get all of that air out of the system. So obviously I brought up a lot of different points on inspection, and I do that because that really is the one that's going to be the most involved typically with you as the buyer, as well as me as your realtor. And there's just other people involved with the inspector, potentially a radon or a sewer scope person. And then the seller is usually going to have some level of friction, or just there's going to be some pushback by us to the sellers in most cases to try and get a little bit more dollars out of the deal. So if we find a few things that we want to push back on during our inspection objection, this is the time to do so. And this is, again, something that we'll go through in a lot more depth and detail personally when we get to this point. But I think this is always the one that most of my clients have just had the most questions about or concerns. So nothing to fret about, nothing to get too concerned or worried about. It's just part of this process. And as long as we're being very diligent, monitoring our dates and deadlines, and doing a very thorough job hiring qualified people to help us with these inspections, we're always going to come out ahead and just be educated to know that we're going to be able to make the right decision, whatever makes the most sense for this specific transaction. So once we get past that clear to close date with the lender, if it is going to be a financed deal where we're going to have a mortgage, once we get past that, that's also when we start to coordinate with the seller and also the title company where and when we're going to have the closing. So nowadays, a lot of people actually do closings virtually through e-signatures, just like we're probably going to be doing with the submitting the offers and everything else. I use a secure system called CTME. That is what almost all realtors here in Colorado use. But again, once we get though to the clear to close and we're ready to schedule this closing, it's up to you. What's most convenient? If you're from out of state, not a big deal. We can do this again remotely. They're actually going to have a notary also get on the Zoom call and verify that it's you and allow you to then do the e-signature virtually. Or some people like just to still go into the title office. That's typically where most closings happen, and just be there to do it in person. And one thing I will say, a lot of people are always concerned about maybe having to go to the closing with the other party. Maybe there's been some friction with some of these negotiations during the inspection phase, and you just really don't want to have to maybe talk to these people face to face at somewhere like a closing table, which might be a little intimidating. Don't worry about that. It's totally up to you, as well as the other side of this transaction, whether they want to do it in person, virtually. If it is going to be in person, whether they want to do it at the same time or do it separate. All of that is totally up to you. So if that's something that's concerning you, please don't let that get to you or sweat about that, because it is very easy and they're always very accommodating to make sure that we do it in whatever environment is working best out for you. So typically the day of closing, we're going to do what we call a final walkthrough. This will be an opportunity for you if you are in town, or if not, I'll do this on your behalf. We'll always want to go to the home prior to closing. If closing's at noon on a Thursday, maybe at about 9 a.m. on Thursday, I'm going to go over there. If you're in town, I'm going to meet you over there, or I can do this on my own. But basically, just do one final walkthrough of the home, make sure that nothing has dramatically changed from what we're expecting the home to look like. If there's any fixtures, anything that is required to be part of the sale of the home, things like certain appliances, maybe anything fixed to the wall, like some certain fans or lighting fixtures, or maybe even some decorative stuff that's just a permanent fixture of the home. The sellers are not allowed to take any of that stuff if it's identified in the contract as a fixture, something that is included in the sale of the home. So we'll walk through the house and just ensure that all of that is the case, and there's no red flags, anything that's just a dramatic, like, uh-oh, this is not what we're expecting. So that's always the final walkthrough, being done again that morning of, or maybe the night before. If it's a vacant home, usually the night before is acceptable, but as close to the closing date and time as possible. That way we're really assured that it is in its condition that we're expecting. When we get to the closing, we're going to go through our net sheet. We're going to go through all of the different, debits and credits for each of the two parties, and what you pay, what they pay, basically just to come down to that final dollar amount of what dollar amount you're going to have to bring to pay for the home and have it now be yours. Typically, this is a wire transfer. That tends to be the easiest nowadays. Wire transfers, the only thing I'll say about that is it is super important that we're very mindful that we're only using certain systems to send money or financial information to and from. It's always very, very important that we don't put ourselves in a position where we might be jeopardized by sharing this personal financial information the incorrect way. My transaction coordinator, as well as myself, and also the title company, will be very, very diligent about reminding you about this when that time comes, just to ensure that this is being done through the correct channels to have our utmost, highest level of security. Once we go to the closing table, we'll have you sign on the dotted line, go through all of the transaction documents. Typically, this can take anywhere between about 30 and 45 minutes. And then, assuming that the time of possession is when both parties have mutually executed the contract, the home is yours. However, sometimes that is also in the contract when the possession date and deadline is. There are scenarios where this might not be immediately after the closing. I talked in the last video about a post-closing occupancy. Sometimes a seller has maybe a month where they still need to be in the home to get ready to move into their new home. That could be a strategy that we use during negotiating the offer. Or maybe they actually now become a tenant of yours for the next 30 days and still live in the home before then at that point, that possession date coming to the date where then now you're able to move in for yourself. So unless there's a scenario like that where you have a post-closing occupancy, typically it's going to be that same day as closing. So once you get over to the house with your keys, typically it's on the day of closing. Now you are officially the owner of this new home. So now it's time to celebrate. I always love just, enjoying this moment with my clients, and also just reminiscing over the past 30, 60, 90 days, however long it's been that we've been working together, and just really, taking a step back and just appreciating our time together, and just understanding that it really does take a lot of people to successfully go from point A to point B, and eventually, to point C, which is the closing. I just always think that it's just so rewarding to think about all these different steps that we've gone through together to get to this final step, which is your keys are in your hand and you're excited to meet the movers and move into the new home. So I hope you guys got a little bit of value out of this. I know I kind of went all over the place a bit on this contract to close portion, but really I just wanted to hit a few of these points that tend to be the most common with questions from my clients. These inspections, appraisals, and some of these other related dates and deadlines during the contract to close process. If you have any of those specific questions, obviously I am here for you 24/7. Would love to help answer any of those in more depth. So don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out with whatever questions you might have. And as I said at the beginning of this video, congratulations. You made it through all 5 of these videos on home buying from A to Z. Hope you got some value out of this. And more than that, I just want to make sure that we are connecting. So if you're still in the process of deciding whether or not you want to buy a home, or you're just still shopping around on who you might want to use as a realtor, I would just love the opportunity still to connect with you. My phone number, my email, all that info is down below. And if nothing else, just give me the opportunity to learn a little bit more about your specific situation and provide any value, any advice, any tips, just anything at all that I can do to hopefully make this a reality for you. And home ownership is one of these things that is talked about, but not necessarily a reality for a lot of people. And I just want you to understand that while it does maybe feel overwhelming and a little bit daunting at times, we're going to be there together. I've got a team of very qualified, educated people on the team to help with all these different times throughout the process, and we're going to get this job done together. So I'm really excited to hopefully work with you. And again, thank you so much for watching all these videos on home buying from A to Z. If you have any questions, reach out. And until I see you next time, Have a great rest of your day.